Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Wheel of Mind, the Wheel of Time point of view reread podcast. In this bonus season, we're reading perspectives from some of Matt Cawthon's friends as a follow up to our Matt season we just had. Welcome to what we're calling Season 2.5, Episode 5, where we're reading Jolene's only point of view. I'm your co host, Lajara Dane of the White Aja.
Hi, and I'm Giskel Simaris, a scholar from Ilion. For any new listeners to our series, I want to remind you that The Wheel of Mind is an in depth character reread podcast, and we drop spoilers at random times, so this is your only spoiler warning. Today, we're examining a summary of Jolene Sadai's only point of view in Chapter 17 of A Crown of Swords. Chapter 17 is entitled A Triumph of Logic. But before I begin, I want to give a little bit of the backstory that'll help put this in perspective. Because this is not the first time that Jolene has appeared in the story, but we're really first introduced to her as a major character in the previous chapter. Matt was trying to find Nynaeve and Elaine in the Terracin Palace when he runs into Jolene Maza and Teslyn Sadai. He describes it like this quote, "The two women confronting him could not have been more different. One was slender, with a fetching smile, in a green and gold dress that showed a hint of what he judged to be a fine bosom. Except for that ageless face, he might have thought to strike up a conversation. It was a pretty face, with eyes large enough for a man to sink into. Ah, a pity. The other had the agelessness too, but seeing it took him a moment. He thought she was scowling until he realized that must be her normal expression. Her dark, almost black dress covered her to the wrist and chin, for which he was grateful. She looked scrawny as an old bramble. She looked as if she ate brambles for breakfast. End quote. Moments later, then, either Adelaus or Vandine arrived and started playing tug of war against the other two, and Matt was the rope. Then later he discovered that someone had slipped a note into his pocket during that confusion, a note warning Nynaeve and Elaine that they were pushing too hard and were still in danger from the tower. That brings us to chapter 17, our focus, and the only Jolene point of view in the story. Jolene entered her apartment in the Terracin Palace that she shared with Teslyn Sadai, and found Teslyn sitting at a writing table, penning a letter. The apartment was large enough for Blarick and Finn as well, her two warders, but Teslyn was a red and would not tolerate them there. Jolene mused that, though the two of them were equals, Teslyn usually got her way. Teslyn questioned Jolene about the punishments that had been demanded by Elaida. Jolene had been a sitter for the Reinaja before Elaida had removed her and demanded penance. Teslyn remarked that Elaida thought Jolene still acted like a child. Jolene thought that Elaida was a tyrant and would soon probably find herself deposed. Jolene was still loyal to the tower and was furious and despised all of the rebel Aes Sedai, yet she truly had no love for Elaida. Quote, Elaida had been petted too much as a novice, made over too much for her strength and the remarkable speed of her learning. Jolene suspected that was why she was in such a fury about Elaine and Egwene and the village wilder named Nynaeve, because they were stronger than she, because they had spent far less time as novices. Still, they had their orders to deliver the three girls to the tower. Once they had found Elaine and Nynaeve in Ibu Dar, they had waited to obey, hoping for some of the strife in the tower to lessen. They could only give in so far to Elaida's bullying, after all. Teslin suggested that they delay no longer, as two of the girls and Matt Cawthon should put them back in Elaida's good graces. Waiting too long could seem treasonous. Jolene urged waiting some more. The girls would be punished soon enough, both for running away and then as well for posing as full sisters. It wasn't their fault that they had gotten involved with those rebel Aes Sedai, but Jolene was willing to wait until Elaida was deposed, if possible, before bringing these girls back.
So, from Matt's thoughts, we learned that nobody knows which of these two White Tower Aes Sedai, Jolene or Teslyn, is the leader of this envoy from Elaida. And then when we get into Jolene's point of view, at first it's a little bit unclear, but then it becomes increasingly clear over this chapter who's really in control. So at the beginning, Jolene keeps thinking about how they're matched in basically any way that matters, and they stand basically they have basically the same standing. And even though she doesn't say that explicitly, it seems to hint that they have pretty much the same capacity for channeling. One of them isn't necessarily stronger than the other or anything. And then I actually went back in the Wheel of Time Companion and confirmed that they are equal in the power. But it turns out that they're not in other ways. Teslin is older, which is not something, it's another one of those things I said I don't like to mention, but we find that out through Jolene's memories of having been lectured by Teslin. And we also know that Teslin was favored of Elaida, whereas Jolene was ordered to set herself a penance. So even though Teslin is being punished by being sent out here to Abu Dar, she was not punished as harshly as Jolene. So Teslin has more power in this relationship, and she starts to exercise it, especially because Jolene, in Teslin's eyes, really stepped out of line when she tried to take control of that situation with Matt by censuring Marililla and by, claiming that they're going to bring Matt back with them. Even though that's something Teslin wants to do, she didn't want Jolene being the one calling the shots in public like that. So it just sets the stage pretty quickly for how the rest of their interactions are going to go throughout the books.
Oh, yes, it does. They they are in such contrast that it makes for a good pairing, and it used to really get on my nerves at first, the 2 of them, because
Mhm.
they were so interested in the politics and the things
Yeah.
going on, behind the scenes more or less, and I really didn't like either one of them, probably because so much of the time they're seen from the rebel Aes Sedai point of view or from Matt's point of view.
Mhm.
Although Matt, again, he really liked Jolene's looks from the very beginning.
Yeah.
From the very the very beginning, that was the first thing is, "Oh, I would have asked her to dance if she didn't have that ageless face,"
Yep.
because everything else about her, she's attractive, she's a little short, about 5'4", I think they said, real dark hair and these eyes a man could just fall into, so, she has so many things that catches Matt's attention. Sounds like a cute little thing, but he's put off by her, I guess, her actions, the things she does. And then we see Teslin, on the other hand, is so unattractive, kinda scrawny, like he's glad her dress comes all the way up to the chin, and all the way to her wrists. You don't wanna show any skin, that's not gonna be a good thing. Yet she's the one that we find out later had slipped the note in his pocket. She's the one we find out later, who does some other things to help Matt or to help the girls. It's I've always been a little confused by their interactions. Didn't really know why the 2 of them were paired together and why they do some of the things they do. We'll get into that a little deeper, I guess,
Mhm.
you know, following some of your other remarks, but, um,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
they're interesting, and I think the contrast between the 2 is good and is healthy for the story, but, I don't know, for some reason, I guess in this setting, I don't like them as much. Once they are traveling with a circus, I like them a lot better,
Mhm.
and a lot of it's just the Ibudar setting. This is the point in the story
Yeah.
when things begin to start bogging down for me.
Well, I think it makes sense that, yeah, we have talked before about Obudar being the slog, and a lot of people feeling that way and getting frustrated with many aspects of the storyline associated with this setting. And I also think that Jolene and Teslin become more interesting when they're a little more humbled, and that's what generally what you get with these arrogant characters anyway, is they have to face some very serious obstacles and really decide who they want to be after that. And I've got more on that after, I guess, my remarks from the rest of Teslin and Jolene's stories. But just briefly, I had kind of forgotten who was who in this
Yes.
story a lot until we took a very deep dive into Matt's point of view. Then I started to learn them. Even then, I still missed so much. So now I've noticed just from a close reading of this one point of view of Jolene's that Jolene seems pretty passionate. She's very much of this green Aja stereotype. She lashes out towards Marililla, and it's not really that much to do with whatever's going on in the moment, or even because of Marililla being allied with the rebels. It's more of a way for her to take revenge over the harsh teaching methods that she remembered from the older Aes Sedai from long ago. And so now that they're both Aes Sedai and they're in a situation where there's not a whole lot of other Aes Sedai around to really judge them, not any that's in power over all of them anyway, she feels the freedom to, tell Marililla off like she's always wanted to. And Jolene now she's has a higher standing. She has a higher channeling capacity than Marililla, so she feels justified in doing this because the people of lower standing in terms of the power have to defer to the higher ones. She is very ruled by her passions. She seems pretty immature here also by Aes Sedai standards too, because she channels just for simply pouring a drink, and they tend to have disdain for frivolous uses of Sidar like that. Anything that's kind of menial tasks, they really look down on. But she is just sort of exercising this freedom after the penance she had set for herself at Elaida's urging before she left to come to Ebudar. So now that that penance is over, she's kind of serving that in a different capacity, I guess, by coming out here to the edge of nowhere as how she sees it. She is just willing to exercise any power she can over anybody else. As soon as the opportunity comes up, right? She's going to grab and try and claim Matt, or she's going to tell off Marililla. And so it just speaks to her being kind of petty and immature and sort of the worst of some of the Aes Sedai stereotypes, I guess.
Right. And you see a little of that out of Teslin as well, because
Oh, yeah.
when Jolene is explaining, why she spoke to Marililla that way, and the way she treated us in class when we were novices, and Teslin brings up, well, what Elaida said about you is true, and the conversation goes a few more sentences before she's kind of, well, back up a minute now. What did Elaida say about me?
Mhm.
And she talks about how Elaida says you act like a child. You never did grow up, and some people just don't. And that was just to throw Jolene off track. That was just
Absolutely. That was
to
petty,
throw her off balance a little bit. Yeah, it was kind of petty. And it would be true because she said it straight out.
right?
But, it's like a truth she held back until she needed to just pull Jolene back a little bit.
Yeah, yeah, her deployment of it was strategic. There was no lie there, but
Yes,
yeah.
right. And again, before this deep dive, I couldn't remember as much about these 2.
Mm,
I didn't, recall some of the dynamics there, but, yeah, when you look at it like this, you begin to see a lot more in it, because before the deep dive, I did not remember that, Tesla is the one who slipped the note.
mhm.
She's the one who was up in the Damane kennels later, and Matt visited her before the giant escape
Yeah.
from Ibudar, the grand escape. We find out later when Matt is kissing Jolene in the inn, trying to hide her from the Seanchan. There's just moments after that, we find out Teslin had drugged her with Fort Root.
Yeah.
So a lot of things that Teslin does happens off camera,
Mhm.
basically. You find out about it later in the story that she's doing things, she's busy, but before the deep dive, I didn't connect all of those dots of her being the same
Right.
character and trying to figure out her motivations for that. And that's one thing I
Mhm.
still struggle with, is trying to understand her motivations. I like her as a character.
Mhm.
She brings a lot to the story. She winds up helping Matt quite a bit, but I still don't understand the why. So, maybe today's deep dive into Jolene will help us understand Teslin a little bit better, who is another
Right.
great character, but Teslin does not get a point of view anywhere in the story, and this is Jolene's single one. So,
Yeah, which is why I kinda see this as the Teslin and Jolene episode, because, I mean, from this single Jolene perspective, there's only so much we can get about her,
right.
and we get just as much about Teslin as we do about Jolene, and then the rest of the time, we have just mini books of these people, mostly from Matt's perspective, so I think we can kind of sort of analyze both of them because it's so difficult to do the one without the other because their stories are so intertwined, right?
Yes.
And I too was curious about Teslin's motives. Once I started piecing together the plot points she's actually associated with, like you were just saying, I was trying to figure out why. And Matt also was curious about that. Why in the world would you slip me this note? And I'll get into that a little bit more later. But I think
Mhm.
for now, in this scene in this chapter, Teslin calls Jolene on her childishness or drops that comment about Elaida to get her to bait her to ask the question about it, to exert some power over her, as we said. And I'm trying to figure out why. Why would she want to? Well, I think that there's going to be some conflict between many Aes Sedai when they're very close in power level anyway. And they're pretty much identical as the way the measurements are documented in the companion, which I don't necessarily understand how the ranking system works, but they have the same numbers next to their names.
Right.
I think if you take that where there wouldn't be clarity about who is supposed to defer to whom. That's going to cause some problems. Somebody would want some kind of edge since they can't get an edge with the power. I think also the fact that they're opposing Ajas. I mean, he made red and green as about opposing as he could get. Robert Jordan did, and I think that's just funny because they're opposite each
Right.
other on the color wheel too, and they're also like
Yeah.
paired opposites in your vision. So like if you see,
Yes.
if you look at something red for a long time, you're going to get a green after image, or vice versa. I mean, there are those elements, but there's also the fact that I think Teslin as a red who her only protection is just herself as an Aes Sedai, she might even feel a little off balance. I don't know that she would admit it to herself, but she might feel off balance with the fact that Jolene has two warders, which is kind of a little power up that Teslin herself doesn't have. So I think that Teslin just feels the need to undermine Jolene a little bit in order to have that edge. And the reason I think she has that edge is it appears once we know she's the one who slipped Matt the note that she wants to interfere with Elaida's plans to some degree, and we'll get into that as well. But it's funny that here in this scene, when we don't know all that yet, if we're first time readers, I would have taken Teslin's proposal at face value when she talks about, well, let's
Yes.
just get Elaine, Nynaeve, Matt, and Avienda and
Mhm.
take them to the tower. And now, with the benefit of hindsight and all the other plot elements we know, it seems like she stoked Jolene's grievances with Elaida purposely and proposed an opposite option that she knew Jolene would oppose just to stall that mission. And so it seems like she's got uncertain loyalty to Elaida, and we can find out maybe a little more about why that is. I did some digging in the companion because I felt like when she talked to Matt, it still wasn't really enough. But I think I'll get into that a little bit later in the episode when we can get into some of their other actions, and I think that'll help contextualize it. Yeah, did you have any other notes on these two before I get into the summary of the rest of their stories?
No, no, just that I enjoy this, and I'm still looking forward to that casting announcement for Jolene for the show because, evidently they're gonna choose a hottie.
Yeah, they'll have to, right? The next that we hear about Jolene and Teslin, as you already referred to, it's following the Shanchan invasion of Ebu Dar, where Teslin drugged Jolene with fork root so that Jolene couldn't prevent Elaine and Nynaeve from escaping. But then Teslin herself was captured and collared as Damane. Jolene's warders had to keep moving her until Satella Anan hid her, and Matt agreed to help her escape. Matt felt this obligation to do so because he believed that she was the one who slipped in the note. We've already talked about the fact that it's just because he has this bias because she's attractive to him, but it turns out
Yes.
it wasn't her. And at this point in the story, Jolene was feeling like Teslin got what she deserved anyway. She doesn't care anything about rescuing Teslin. Matt goes to find Teslin in the demonic kennels, and he finds out that she didn't necessarily care about Elaine and Nynaeve, which is not really surprising having read her from Jolene's perspective, but she wanted to inconvenience Elaida. And so he thinks, wow, I really shouldn't owe her anything. That's very petty. But Matt still offers to help her escape anyway because he's a nice guy and does not want to think of himself that way. So once Teslin realized that Matt was serious and that he wasn't just joking with her, she promised to do anything that he asked. She even removed the stipulation that it had to be short of treason to the White Tower. So she almost said anything unless it's treason to the White Tower. And then she said, "No, I'll do anything that you ask if you'll help me get out of here." And she also insists that he needs to free Edicina as well. Matt was like, "Well, I mean, I know there's a few more Aes Sedai, but I don't know how I'm gonna get that many out of here." And Teslin said, "Don't worry about it. You only have to think about Edicina because the other two are so brainwashed that they would probably out us to the Shanchan and betray our escape attempt." So Matt and Egyanan together help the Aes Sedai escape by collaring them and join them with these disgraced Sul'dam that Egyanan had lying around. So we have Jolene paired with Bethaman, Teslin with Rena, and Edicina with Seta, and they all ended up in Valen Lucas traveling show, as we remember from our Matt season. Teslin had to eventually reveal herself as Aes Sedai to the traveling show when she healed Egyanan slash Lylewyn after the former ship captain had gotten stabbed by Rena. And then later in their travels, there's some trouble when Bethaman admits to her ability to see weaves. Matt happens upon Jolene slapping the former Sul'dam. In this situation, he grabbed Jolene, Jolene slapped him, and then he spanked her. After she was chastened by this weird scene, Jolene agreed to teach Bethaman to channel properly so that she could have control over her abilities, at least enough to keep her from dying. Teslin, on the other hand, since she's actually been kept as Damane, Unlike Jolene, she would rather just let the former Suldam die of channeling sickness instead. She just does not care. The tension among the Aes Sedai, Suldam, and Tuon as they're traveling together continues to mount. The Aes Sedai keep pestering Tuon once they realize who she is, thinking that they could manipulate a ruler like they've always done. But instead, Tuon collared the three Aes Sedai, and she only released them when Mat got them to agree to stop trying to pressure her. After Mat's party broke away from the circus, they met up with the band, and they waged guerrilla warfare against the Shanchan alongside Musange. The Aes Sedai contributed their fireballs to this fight, and Jolene believed that Mat owed her for thus having sealed their victory, although it was really the crossbows more than anything, according to Musange. Jolene continued to insinuate that she was owed something from Mat, and she does this several times, and it seems kind of creepy. And then Teslyn even warns Mat that Jolene's pretty immature. Watch out because she might try to bond you as a warder, whether or not you understand what she's asking you when she asks it. Jolene generally continues to be pretty petulant, demanding many extra horses to leave the band before they stopped in Hinterstap. Mat refused that demand at the time. Both Aes Sedai stayed in Hinterstap along with the rest of Mat's party, and they held their own pretty well against the bloodthirsty residents, but they did need help to be able to leave the inn and ultimately the town. They had tied up some serving women to carry off to get some information from later to figure out why the entire town went nuts like this, but as all the village's residents do, they disappeared and ended up back in their own beds somehow. And then after that Hinterstap incident, Teslyn helped Mat fight against the Golem. Jolene just asked him for horses again, more nicely this time, and he finally agreed. And then she expressed regret that she had not bonded him and said that she had half a mind to do so at the time. Mat, in turn, laced her favorite sweets with sprinklewort to turn her mouth blue. Jolene, Teslyn, and Edicina all returned to the White Tower together, and after that, we don't hear anything else about Jolene or Edicina. But Teslyn came back, claiming that the White Tower was not to her liking, and so she lent her strength to the Dragonsworn during the last battle. And that's the last we hear of any of these women that we just covered in the previous chapter.
Again, so that's a great synopsis, by the way, because you pulled that from many different books to get that all together in one place.
Thanks.
Part of my confusion is still basically with Teslin. She shows that she doesn't like Elaida, but she is a red, so she's going to support the only Amerlin from the red that they've had in centuries.
Mm.
She's very loyal to the tower. Now, she and Jolene both are very loyal to the tower.
Yeah.
Yet, Teslin does things to mess up this mission that winds up being in the girl's favor and in Matt's favor. But, the only thing she just kind of did it to spite Elaida. And I never really understood that since you'd think she would be more on Elaida's side. But I guess you can just chalk it up to she's one of these people who don't like bullies. And whether you're
Yeah.
a red or not, you must admit that Elaida is a bully. I mean,
Mhm.
she just is. She's someone who very quickly got drunk on her own power.
Yes. And Teslin had been described, according to the companion anyway, because that's where I really got a lot of this context that I had trouble piecing together from the main books. According to
Right.
the companion, Teslin had been thought of as being pretty much as harsh as Elida, and that may be a tidbit we could have pulled out from Jolene's thoughts as well when she was thinking of her as a teacher. So maybe it's just
Right.
that they're so much alike that they clash. Maybe that's part of
Could
it.
be. Didn't think of
It
that.
could also be that I didn't understand fully the context of their mission together until I read the companion. It turns out that Jolene was raised as a sitter. She was one of the people who helped depose Suwan and put Elida in power in the first
Right.
place, even though she's a green. The reason she got sent to Ebudar is because she was on this committee that was supposed to find the girls. It wasn't turning up any helpful news. And so Elida stripped that position from her and then sent her on this mission. And she also had her set her own penance and make sure it was very harsh. And it was extremely harsh. It was like, you can't use the one power. She had to like kneel and pray for hours a day for like the wisdom to be a better Aes Sedai on like a stone
Right.
floor, and do like hard manual labor. It was
Yeah.
just really
And
intense.
only eat unsalted broth and bread with water to drink. Yes. It's like, wow, that's very harsh.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Very ascetic. Because of that, we could see why Jolene wouldn't like Elida, and it might be easy to stoke her, dislike of her. For Teslyn, Teslyn was sent basically arbitrarily with Jolene. She was sent so that Elaida wouldn't look biased against just the green, which is strange because you'd think Elaida wouldn't care about that since she entirely disbanded an Aja
Right.
and she still kind of thinks of herself as a red. But she ostensibly sent Teslyn so that she wouldn't look biased. That's what Teslyn understood to happen anyway. And so she just kind of pettily wants to get back at her about that. That's all I could gather from her story. And so it seems like a pretty shallow motivation
Right.
in the beginning. It's not anything that has to do with caring about these girls. It's just like she wants to mess up Elida's plans because Elida upset her by sending her here with
Right.
Jolene,
Right.
whom she doesn't seem to be able to tolerate very well. Yeah, so I think that's the long and short of it. She just wants to get back at Elaida because Elaida punished her arbitrarily.
Yeah. She might just be one of those people who always have to poke at someone, just as,
Yeah,
she kept, bringing up things Elida had said to throw Jolene off. Perhaps she's one of
yeah.
these people, she was doing it to Elida too. She just exerted her power in a very,
Mhm.
passive aggressive way, finding little ways to get at people.
I could
Yeah, so that
totally
that
see
that
that.
could be.
Yeah, because she thinks it was arbitrarily that she was sent, but yeah, she could have just been upsetting Elaida just by being
Right, right,
herself and didn't really view it that way. Yeah, so it doesn't really surprise me that she got sent off somewhere
right.
far away.
Now, I'll tell you what surprised me about your summary, putting everything together in one place like that. I had totally forgotten that Edicina was rescued too. Was one of the 3 Aes Sedai who was rescued.
Oh, I know. I mean, she's mentioned so little anyway.
Right, it's always Teslin and Jolene because they are the 2 that appear to be polar opposites in their temperament and their looks and in their stand, if one's for something, the other one's against it, and so you'd never really see one without the other from Ibu Dar until the time they head back to the tower. The only time you see one of them by themselves is really Teslin at the end in the last battle. As you said, when
Yeah.
she came to help the Dragonsworn and to do her part in the last battle. So and she really, to me, shows the best parts of her character in
Yeah.
that she would come out. Well, again, part of that might have been petty. She didn't want to be in a tower where, a red had been deposed.
Well, yeah, true.
Because there are only 3 Amerlins who were raised from the red, and all of them had been a total disaster.
Yeah.
I guess her pride just made it difficult to stay in the tower around that. But still, so it may have been spite, but I like that about her. But yeah, Edicina is just it's like she's the 5th wheel. She's just hanging out there doing nothing. She's
I know it, and she's a rebel, so there could have been more going on there, but I think there was already so much tension between Teslin and Jolene, it's like, where do you even fit another opposing piece
right, right.
with all of that? So they just made I mean, part of the reason I think Edicina was so in the background is because she had been collared longer than Teslin, and she had been captured in a different place and brought to Ebudar. So,
Oh, I
she
didn't
was
remember
already
that.
pretty meek and a lot more traumatized maybe, and that's why her
Right,
personality stays so quiet and why we don't remember her very much.
right, right. She was already very close to being broken to, completely.
Yeah, I
Okay.
think so.
That's interesting. Again, it's just some of these people that had a hand in Matt's story, that had a strong influence with him, even if it was not necessarily pushing him toward, being that great captain at the last battle. Still, they had a hand in shaping his story, and I like it. It's fun
Mhm.
to look into this because again, there were several elements here until we tried to take a deeper dive. I mean, I knew all of these things, but I never put them together, never put the puzzle pieces together to form the full picture.
Oh, yeah, same. I mean, like you said earlier, I had such a hard time keeping up with which of these 2 is even which until we read the Matt
Right.
season, till we read all the Matt chapters. And even then, I still didn't fully remember like little easy like shortcuts to remember which was which until the Gathering Storm. I mean,
Mm.
that's 5 books after we meet them and it was a reread for me. It still
Right.
wasn't the first time. So that's when I got the, oh, okay, Jolene, hot, mean, Teslin, ugly, nice,
Yes,
got it.
yes, yeah,
Because Matt thinks about it so explicitly again to remind you there.
yeah.
So yeah, I get a much stronger impression of each of them now that it's all kind of laid out together for this episode. I get a much stronger impression that before this, Jolene was petulant and demanding, and that she kind of was the whole time. She didn't really change. Teslin was always more reasonable, but more manipulative in the beginning, more power hungry, a little more passive aggressive, but she ends up changing quite a bit. So
Yes.
I think one of the reasons it's so easy to forget or like not hang on to these facts about who they are that are established very early in that point of view chapter we just covered is because a lot of the time that we see them kind of early in their stories both pretty traumatized. I mean, Satala and An put it like Jolene's nerve is broken
Right.
when we first meet her. Not first meet her, but when Matt finds her at the end there.
Mhm.
But she seems to recover pretty quickly and just continue to be petulant once they get on the road. And then Teslin, she had the more extended trauma of having been collared longer and or having been collared at all compared to Jolene, and that was
Right.
obviously harder to shake. So we don't really get to see as much about her other than her being very fearful and how, helpful she ends up being to Matt until quite a bit later. So I think she has a longer bit of trauma to process and then she ends up growing quite a bit after that, which
Yes.
I like about her. I mean, when you're looking back in their motivations, it seems like both of them have good reasons to oppose Elaida, even though, as we said, she's of the same Aja, so she kind of has to hide that. I mean, Teslin's reasons are personal grievance, and Jolene's are too, but they end up reacting to that really differently. Teslin takes it in a very rebellious way. I mean, she doesn't stay loyal to the White Tower. That colors forever the relationship that she has with the White Tower, I think, because even after her story with Matt is said and done, she's not comfortable at the tower anymore.
Right.
And
Right.
so she has this like fractured loyalty. She then tried to use for good, right? So she used it to help Matt. She used it to help the girls too, a couple of different times. And she used it to fight alongside the Dragonsworn in the last battle. So she ended up using that for good. Jolene, what I can tell, stays loyal to the White Tower the whole time. She has similar personal grievances with Elaida, and you'd think they would even be worse because her penance she had to set for herself, because Elaida would let her know if it wasn't extreme enough, was very extreme. And so it's interesting that she doesn't defect from the tower,
Right.
really,
Right.
in any significant way.
To me, the worst part of what Elaida did was removed Jolene from being a sitter.
Yeah.
And earlier in the story, I had remembered Elaida doing some things like that, but I didn't recall the name because I
Oh,
didn't
right.
tie Jolene firmly into place in my mind until we got into Ibu Dar,
Mm.
and saw her in this setting, and especially until we're in Valen Lucas Circus after the rescue. That's when these characters really gelled for me in my
Oh,
mind.
yeah.
Because
Mhm.
let's face it, there are thousands of characters in these stories. We get things mixed up.
Yeah.
Or there are some that we run across a name, but we don't really realize later, oh, that's that person. So there's a lot to keep up with in your head that way. But yeah, Elida not only had called for her penance, but had stripped her from being a sitter.
Mm,
Now
yeah.
that's removed from a position of authority within the hall, and I mean that hurts. That really hurts pride. So yeah,
Mm.
I'm amazed that she was not more willing to go with the rebels or help them in
Yeah.
any way. But I guess all of the Aes Sedai had at times gone through different leadership where things really stank. Where it was just
Yeah.
very
That's a
bad
good point.
leadership.
You just get through it, I guess,
Right,
is how they view it. Especially if you're put on an assignment far away, it's probably a little easier to get through it. You're not having to deal with that person all the
right,
time.
right.
So, I mean, and Jolene does consider stuff that's sort of treasonous. She's like, "What if we just don't tell her until she asks that the girls are here?"
Until
you know.
she asked
So
nicely, right?
right, right. But she doesn't say that stuff
No,
until Teslin baits her to get upset at Elaida by being like, "Oh,
right,
Elaida was right about you." So I mean, it just seems like Jolene's allegiances and her actions are still kind of petty and immature the whole time.
right,
And I think the reason she doesn't question her loyalty to the tower beyond that, the reason she never really sides with the rebels or anything is probably like you said. I mean, these Aes Sedai who are a lot older than our main characters, they've weathered a lot of different administrations that they're probably not happy with, and they figured they can get through it. But also, because she helped put Elaida in power, I think there's probably some cognitive dissonance there where she is
yeah,
not going to go back on her word, basically, or her original position of having deposed Siwan. She would have to admit she was wrong back then. And
Right,
she
right.
doesn't wanna do that. She does wanna sorta just patiently wait and sorta secretly hope that somebody deposes Elaida too. She does think about that, but she's not gonna be
Yeah,
involved in it, and she's not gonna
right.
align herself publicly in any way. Yeah, I think it's mostly that she doesn't wanna have to admit that she was wrong.
Oh, absolutely, and it seems like evidently women don't tend to hold on to the Amerlin seat very long, even though it is
Yeah.
typically a lifetime appointment. They went through, like, 3 or 4 between New Spring and Eye of the World.
Yeah, they've moved pretty quickly.
I mean, from the time you go yeah, you go from Tarna to Siwan, and there's 1 or 2
Mm.
in between there at least, so that's 4 just
Yeah.
right there in a 20-year span, which seems rather short.
Yeah, yeah, for lifespans that should be hundreds of years, for somebody to only be in power
Right,
10 years or less is,
right,
yeah, it's a
yeah.
dangerous job.
Which we know the Black Aja had a hand in some of that and shortening the lives of some of these women.
Yeah.
We know many of them, even though it's, obscene to talk about this, many of them may have been advanced in years before they were raised
Mm.
to Amerlin.
Mm.
But yeah, sounds like they've had a lot of bad Amerlins over the years, and the tower had just learned to roll with it. Again, that to me shows a lot of the decay
Mm.
and the weakness of the tower itself. That they didn't try to pick good, strong leaders. They just tried to find somebody who would compromise and get along, and it's just somebody to fill the role sometimes.
Mhm.
It's almost like they were afraid of really strong leaders. But
Yeah.
then they finally put Elida in there, who is strong in the power and has a strong, forceful personality. And yeah, she was so lousy at the job.
Right.
Even if she had had good ideas, and even when she was not being manipulated by the Black Aja the way she was,
Mhm.
she still, yeah, she really let her pride rule her and her arrogance rule her.
Mm.
You remember all the times people would bring reports of what's going on here with the Aiel, or what's going on over here with the rebel Aes Sedai, what's going on over here with young Lord Althor and the Black Tower, and she always ignored the things she didn't want to hear.
Yeah.
It just like she could shape the whole world to her will, rather than listen and pay attention to what's going on. So she had all these terrible faults. Egwene was stronger in the power, stronger of will than Elaida. Elaida could not break Egwene. And yet we see that for the short period of time she was in there, Egwene was a great leader for the tower. She was a great Amerlin. So, yeah, I guess you can go to any extreme with a very powerful leader. They could take you into
Mm.
extremes in any direction. So maybe there's a reason they tried to stick with the middle of the road, the safe choices, but people who obviously didn't last very long. So
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Um,
Either way, I think Jolene's relationship to the tower is just sort of is an immature one. And Teslin started
oh
that
yeah, yeah,
way, but it grew into something different that was a little more
right.
reasoned about doing what she viewed as the right thing.
No, no, I'd sort of say a lot of that maturity, I think, in Tesla was because of the trauma
Mhm.
of being collared, because you see that in many characters in the story, the things they go through matures them, and even
Mhm.
though Teslin was older and should have known better about a lot of things, she was collared longer. When I think you alluded to this earlier, when Tuon tricked the three Aes Sedai in,
Mhm.
in her wagon that night, into kind of making a stand, and she collared all three of them. The whole time, Jolene kept trying to resist. She was the one fighting them.
Mhm.
Teslin didn't fight. Teslin,
Right.
was she just kind of stopped. And Edicina just broke down. I mean,
Mhm.
she was gone. She was down for the count. She was no good to anybody, which showed the level of trauma they had been through.
Mhm.
Even though Jolene had, quote unquote, been broken, according to Satel Anon, or her nerve had been broken,
Yeah.
she had not suffered the level of trauma that Teslin had. So
Right, right. I
once
mean, her
Teslin recovers from that, right,
right. I mean, Jolene's what she had done at that point was mostly just have to run and hide, which is obviously really
Yes,
scary to think about the prospect of being collared, but she had not had that fight kind of beaten out of her yet in the way that Teslin had. So I mean, the reason Jolene was fighting is because that's probably most people's reactions the first time they get collared. But
right.
Teslin had already gone through that phase and had to get to some kind of point of
Yes,
acceptance and doing what this Wildon wants you to do because that's the only way you're not going to be in pain all the time.
right. You're not given a choice in that, right?
Yeah.
So she had that middle ground of having matured a lot through that trauma, having had time to process it and get over it and get through it, and all that time they spent with Matt and working with the Xian Chen for a while, where she could kind of process and work through. She really had I guess, an easier time working through hers than Egwene did because she had that ability to acclimate somewhat, working with
Mm.
Egeon and Lylwyn, working with the 3 Suldam.
Yeah, I mean, having to
Yes,
sleep in the same wagon, be roommates with these people.
right.
Yeah, I guess you have to come to some form of acceptance to not just die of the
Yeah,
exhaustion of being on high alert of
r
fear around them all the time.
right. So because of that, she's a stronger and better character,
Mhm.
that which I guess she had more capacity for it anyway. It sounds like she had a good heart. It's a shame she was of the Red Aja and was so against men the way she was. We find this out in the beginning here of chapter 17, how she wouldn't let Blerick and Finn stay in the palace there in
Yeah.
their apartments. Even though there were rooms, there was plenty of room for them. She would absolutely not even hear of it. So, yeah, she was definitely a member of the Men Haters Club, but I think spending some time around Matt Coffin actually helped her in that regard.
Mhm.
She could see, yeah, there's good men out there where I think she had grown so jaded, in her work as a Red, she really had lost sight of that.
Mm.
So,
Yeah.
even though this perspective is about Jolene, to me, Teslin is the one who grows the most and whom I like the most from this little segment.
Yeah, she ends up being the star of this show, of our
Yeah,
little read through. I agree. And I don't remember liking her from any other reading patterns that we've done. I remember being like, oh, she's the one who is a little nicer, when we got to the end of our Matt season, but I still didn't really process how much she had changed. And
right.
so just laying out Jolene and Teslin's intertwined stories together like this, you really see the parallel of how Jolene doesn't really grow. And by the end, there's still a danger of her bonding Matt, without him knowing what he's signing up for when she asks for it and stuff like that. And Teslin ends up being helpful in saving the world, and we
Yeah,
don't hear anything about whether Jolene was. So yeah, it's just cool that I feel like I got this little hidden gem out of this, one-off
right.
episode about these two. I knew that it would be kind of the Jolene and Teslin show,
Right.
because since Teslin doesn't have those point of views, but she's in all of Jolene's in some capacity. But yeah, I thought this was a cool experience. I was really unsure about whether to even put this chapter in this season, and I'm glad now that I did.
Yes, me too, me too. And to balance it out, though, you do have to remember about Jolene, she is still hot.
Apparently, to Matt a lot, yeah.
I hope everyone will join us next time for our next interlude, episode 6, where we'll begin Furyk Kharid's point of view in The Path of Daggers, chapter 23, and Crossroads of Twilight, chapter 4.
There are neither beginnings nor endings to the turning of the wheel of mind, but this is an ending. To catch a beginning next time an episode drops, subscribe to Wheel of Mind on Podbean, Stitcher, iTunes, or Spotify. You can also find our episodes on YouTube under the channel name Lajara Dane, LaJaradayne. We'd love to hear how we're doing, so please leave us feedback by rating and reviewing on whichever platform you use to listen. You can contact us by emailing at lajaradane@gmail.com or find us on Twitter at mind_wheel. To support the show and get access to some perks, subscribe to us on Patreon for just $3 a month by visiting patreon.com/wheel of mind.